please join me in welcoming the absolutely legendary David Ramjam Rodigan. How you doing, sir?
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. This is a very special night for me. Thank you to Fabric, thank you to Red Bull and Benji and John and Ricky and Mark, who said, Rodders, we need to do this. And thank you to each and every one of you for being here. I hope you'll enjoy the story.
And so should that have been Sir David Ramjam Rodigan? You were always a sir to us before anyway, but for those of you that didn't know, David Rodigan received an MBE from the Queen this year. I think that gets another round of applause. You were always Sir David Ramjam before. Are you officially part of royalty now?
It was an honor, obviously, but more importantly, it was, I believe, the respect shown to the music, which I've spent my whole life playing and loving. I think the indication from the government and the Queen was that this music has become so much a part of our culture, and you've been broadcasting it for over 30 years, so I believe that the award was as much for the music as it was for me. I'd like to think that anyway, and I'm certain that that is the case. It is indeed an honor, and Prince Charles actually said to me, he said, when I approached him, you're allowed to, you know, he asked you a couple of questions, and he said, you really love this music. And I said, yeah. And he said, so do I. He said, how did you fall in love? No, seriously. He said, I love Jamaica. And I think it would be hard not to like Jamaica. And he said, how did you fall in love with it? I said, in the 60s. And then he asked me, you know, what time's the show on? And I plugged the show and said 11 o'clock. And, but the fact is that, you know, we're hearing the stories in the press about Prince Harry and his visit to Jamaica. I think anyone who goes to that island will be struck by the music, particularly back in the day when the music was incredibly melodic and soulful. I would always leave Jamaica with at least half a dozen songs in my head that I had to buy. In more recent times, it's more dum, 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 dum. But in those days, it was much more melodic. I'm talking about the 70s. So I think it's, I mean, Harry apparently came back and started buying reggae records, if we're to believe what we read in the press. And I'm sure that's true because reggae is infectious. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a fever and there is no known antidote. I've had the fever all my life.
And talking of which, I mean, I grew up listening to, like so many people in the room, I've grown up to listening to you on both Capitol and Kiss, and of course, untold cassettes of you at famous clashes. But your work spans so many different generations that people in this room might have come into contact with it at different points in their lives. So can you just clear it up for us? How long have you been broadcasting, and how long have you been DJing at this point?
I started broadcasting professionally in 1978. So maths, simple maths tells you that's 34 years. Wow. And DJing in my bedroom and at house parties and youth clubs and school discotheques from 1967 when I was 16. And I remember playing in the school disco a song called Dry Acid by the Upsetters in 1969, and it blew the place apart. That was the first time I ever experienced a public forward. If the term pull-up had been invented then, I would have said pull-up. But it wasn't. And it was on the school sound system, the public address system. I think if anyone's in this room who has an obsession, and probably many of you do, with music, you'll know that, and I remember Roger Scott, who was my mentor at Capital Radio. I just thought Roger Scott was epitomized broadcasting because his passion, apart from his passion for Bruce Springsteen, his passion for music enabled him to say little and yet say so much about songs. And I always remember him describing how he would play records in his front room and look out behind the net curtains to see if anyone on the street passing was taking any notice of what he was playing. I used to do the same thing, only I did it in my bedroom, looking out in the backyard to see if any of the kids were taking any notice of what I was playing. It's that feeling you have, and you know this, Benji, as a DJ yourself, of wanting to share something that you think is so precious and so important. And that's what I've always loved to do. And it led to DJing by default, really, publicly, because I was working as a young actor, and I didn't think that I would ever get a job on radio as a DJ, but there was an audition at BBC Radio London, and I ended up with that show in 1978.
And you're talking about working as an actor. You studied as an actor, right? You went to drama school.
Yes, I studied economics for a year when I left after I did my A-levels, because everyone told me you should get, you should do something with your life, and you can't be an actor. And being a, well, DJ wasn't even considered. I have to point out, actually, with all due respect to any DJ in the room right now, that being a DJ in the 60s was not terribly cool at all. In fact, a DJ was often the nerdish guy in the corner with the records. Get Rodders to come and play because he's got the records. I mean, why would you want to be a DJ? Because if you're a DJ, you can't check girls, you can't dance with anyone, you're stuck in the corner with a bunch of records. So DJing has evolved now. It's funny, people say, oh, you're a DJ, but there was a time when it wasn't that cool to be a DJ as such. But I was a record collector, and so were many of my friends. And it was about records. Our world revolved around music. And I didn't enjoy studying economics, so I wanted to work in the theatre, and I was offered a place at the Rose Bruford College of Speech and Drama, where I did a 3-year drama and teaching course. And I thoroughly enjoyed the teaching practices across the 3 years. And I was very tempted, and I almost took a position to teach drama at Orpington Boys' School. And that was in 1974. But in that same summer, I'd done a dramatization of Yevtushenko's Zimmer Junction, and I presented it myself and funded it myself at the Little Theatre in St. Martin's Lane. And as a result of that presentation, an actor-manager from the north of England auditioned me and offered me a part as an acting ASM. So you were an actor and you were an assistant stage manager, so you did small parts, you did everything else, dog's body work, costumes, you name it, and that was that was how I started in working in repertory theatres in the north of England. But I was still collecting this music. I remember being a deck chair attendant in Hyde Park in the summer of 1970 and going home and listening to U. Roy records in my bedroom, when I knew this was a life. It had become an obsession with me, and I was fascinated by the sounds that were created. Of course, it was a very different world then, so you had to do a lot of detective work to figure out how these records were made, where they came from, who was this artist, who was this producer, who was this band leader. So you were dependent upon using your ears, your eyes to look at record labels and just try to figure things out. There was no internet, you couldn't phone Jamaica, there was nothing, hardly anything written. I remember on the Melody Maker, they actually did a piece on reggae, and I remember sitting in my bedroom, cutting it up and making it into a record sleeve, the whole article. I mean, this is how precious someone had actually bothered to write about this music, and that's how important it was to me. So that's how I started DJing, and that's how I started broadcasting.
And when was your first pilgrimage to Kingston?
January 1979, never ever forget it. The first night I spent in a place called Edgewater, out by Portmore, and every mosquito in the region just said, we're going to have this guy. And when I woke up the next morning, I was covered in mosquito bumps and bites, and this bus came past, and there was a bus on the street selling bulla cake, cheese, and juice. And I stood out in this burning sun, and I was in Jamaica. The first place I went to was Channel 1, Maxfield Avenue. And I saw Earl Zero outside Channel 1. And that evening, the pilgrimage. Western Kingston, Channel 1 is in Maxfield Avenue, Kingston 12. Next region is Kingston 11, Kingston 10, Kingston 13, Trench Town, Bob Marley, Waterhouse, King Tubby's studio. I can't tell you what it was like to walk up the side and push that gate. It was dark, dogs were barking, and I went into the inner sanctum, and there he was. The man who I'd wanted to meet more than anybody else, because he epitomized dub music. He, as far as I was concerned, almost single-handedly, I know others did so much for it, but when he touched the board, it was, for me, magical, and I got to meet the king. You know, he was so cool, and I remember saying to him and Prince Jammy, because Jammy was his assistant engineer at the time, I said, I've come to cut some dub plates. And Jammy knew of me, and so Tubby said, okay, there's the price, there's the rates up on the wall, let's start. He pressed play on the multi-track, on a 4-track, and this rhythm started, and he looked at me, and I said, no thanks. And he played another one, and he looked at me, and Jammy's just looked at the floor, and Tubby's, you know, like the clock's running, we're going to cut dubs, so what are you going to do? I said, no, I don't like that one. He played another one. I said, no, I don't like that other. And he looked at Jammy's, and they both slightly smiled. I didn't get it at the time. So Tubby's leaned back and took these keys out, and he threw it to this young lad and said, open that cupboard. And this multi-track came out, and Tubby's reeled it up and pressed play. And this is what I heard. And I said to him, yes, yeah, I want to cut that. And I said, who's it by? He said, it's a new singer produced by Yabby U, Vivian Jackson. The singer's name is Michael Haynes, but they're calling him Michael Prophet. And I said, can I cut that? And he said, yes. So I got my money out, and this is the original dub plate, which has only left my house on 2 occasions until tonight, from 1979. It's a King Tubby original dub plate master, and he was very fastidious about sleeves and artwork. And I got him to sign it. And this, if I may, is the dub. And
Please.
He cut it straight away. In those days, the dub was cut. Dub came about because DJs and sound systems were so obsessed with the music that they wanted things that no one else had. So they drove this thing forward. We, the DJs, with all due respect to the musicians, we drove this thing forward because we wanted stuff that no one else had, because we were so obsessed with the music. So the engineers had to find ways of satisfying our demand for music. So the 4-track, the plate cut as it played. So he mixed on the 4-track. And this is a photograph of him. Actually at his control tower, at the board. And that's one of the first ever King Tubby dub hours. It was legendary. So it's him and Jammy, and he mixed it. You could hear the counting. So you can hear already that he's giving me a different mix to the one that would come out because he's mixing it from the 4-track. And as it came to the end of the vocal, of course, he would just simply scroll, rewind the tape, and then begin again, because you automatically, there was no hesitation, you automatically cut a dub of the vocal. You had to have a dub, so your DJ and your sound system could DJ and chat over it. Or so you could just play it as an instrumental, so it went straight to the instrumental, and it just scrolled like this. And if I may, Benji, just spin forward while I remember, because I don't want to forget, and there's so many things to remember and so many stories to tell. I can't tell them all, but while they come to me, I'd just like to share them with you. To 1985, when I cut another dub with King Tubby, and this is it.
I don't know about you, I feel like a little kid right now.
He changed his artwork. Let's pass that round so people can please handle it with great care. It's a treasured possession, but you can see the attention to detail on his plates and how fastidious he was. He was meticulous, by the way. There was no smoking in the studio. If he wasn't there and people lit up, they would hear him approaching and the place would go, he's coming, he's coming, he's coming. And they would all, you know, and he would walk in. Somebody was smoking here? No, Mr. Tubbs, no, Mr. Tubbs. There was that diligence. It was a very serious place. It was a workplace. He created this new sleeve, Waterhouse. It was also referred to as Firehouse because a lot of there was all sorts of problems in that region and houses are burnt down and so on. But again, being an avid collector, I got him to sign this. And it was when the music had changed, and some people say that the advent of techno reggae or digital reggae was the demise of it. There are still people in Jamaica who say, Rodigan, you should never have played Slang Tang on the radio. That was a disgrace to Jamaican music. I remember Mr. Bradshaw, the Sonny Bradshaw. He approached Barry G and I in the hotel of the Pegasus one evening and told us point blank, and he was a band leader and a leader of the Jamaican Musicians Union. He said, we were a disgrace. We should never have played Slang Tang. It was deeply offensive to Jamaican musicians, and it should never have been played. Slang Tang, as I'm sure you all know, was the advent of techno, of what we now call digital reggae. The fact that this could be made on a computer, not by a human being. And we all know where it came from, a Casio music box. A boy called Noel Davey took it to Jammies, and Jammies cut a dub with tenor store called How What a Walk Go a Pumpkin Belly. Who asked me that? Now my old time granny. And that was a dub plate that he voiced to go to the country. And they tried to revoice it, and they couldn't. So what came out was that was Slang Tang. And that was Jammies. Over at Tubby's, there was a counteraction, if you like. Tubby's found some musicians called the Firehouse Crew, a young Christian group who were experimenting with synthesizers. Remember, this is a long time ago. So this was one of the first examples of techno or digital computerized reggae, as they called it. And this was if you think Slang Tang was big, this was big too. This is by Anthony Redrose, and the song is called Tempo. And when I was cutting the dub in 85, I think it was 85, yeah, I said to Tubby, oh, Tubby, can you put the tone button on the front of the dub? Because when you had that tone button echoed by Tubby, you knew that was a Tubby dub. So as he pressed, him and Fat Man, the assistant engineer, he said, you mean this, like this? And he pressed the tone button.
With an echo chamber.
It sounds sweeter with an echo chamber. Don't you know we are the danger? Tempo. This tune was, when this tune played in Western Kingston, I can't describe the feeling when you heard this playing from a sound system, never mind on the radio. And then, of course, the vocal came to an end, and he looked at me as if to say, and I said, yeah, of course, yeah, the dub. So they mixed this dub of the vocal. And for me, this was digital music at its finest. And just while we're on this subject, I think my last picture, or penultimate picture, is of this man, Augustus Pablo, because something very significant happened when he met King Tubby, because they created that album called King Tubby Meets the Rockers Uptown, which I'm sure everyone will remember, and it epitomized what this music was about for so many of us, the fact that you could have dub created in this way. And, well, I don't need to play that instrumental, I'm sure everyone knows it. But if I may, just play two more examples of how a dub plate can come. I was in a dance at the Q Club in Paddington one night, and Jar Screw rushed in and said, I just voiced this, play it. And when a producer comes to you without look in his eye, you just play it. This was the tune. Drum and bass, dub plate cutting, instrumental music, drum and bass music, echo chamber music, rapping. The whole concept of someone talking in time over a rhythm, as far as I was concerned, had origins to a degree in American music, yes, but really the daddy for them all were the Jamaican DJs like King Stitt, Count Machuki, and this man, who was so revered by 1974, 75, 76 that I swear to God he could have run for Prime Minister in Jamaica, Big Youth. This album, Screaming Target, was truly legendary, and I think what epitomized what he did was this track I'm going to play now, which is called Waterhouse Rock, and it's over a Joe Gibbs rhythm, and he used to DJ live on sound systems before he started making records, and this kind of sums him up.
Teach you about the rocking on the track. Teach you about the rocking on the track. Sounds called water house rockers, I will say. Sit man, oh man, if your brother do you wrong, forgive him as I will say.
Are you ready for the breakdown? Here it comes.
There's not no lot for your brother to say, because tomorrow you may be taking away, as I will say. Slowly but surely, as I will tell you.
I love the puffy he's leaning on in his front room.
To Almighty. Sounds called water house rockers, I will say. The rocket like that.
He used to DJ for a sound called Tippertone. When Tippertone strung up, you better back off. Or King Tubby's strung up, because all these, like U-Roy, I-Roy, U-Roy used to DJ for Dickie's Dynamic before he came over to King Tubby's. So they learnt their craft by entertaining crowds live. And if you can't bust a dance in Jamaica on the mic in front of an audience, then forget it. You're not going to the studio.
As I will say, you may teach about the songs, I will say.
Okay, and one last image. When I received the MBE, a dear friend of mine, Noel Hawkes, sent me something in the post. And I couldn't believe that someone kept this for so long. It was my first ever public engagement as a radio DJ playing in a club. And it was in High Wycombe. In 1979, Radio London, Capital Radio, David Rodigan. I mean, how priceless is that? A tribal Hot 100. I mean, me? No. But that was my first ever gig, and I thank Noel Hawkes for that. I'm sorry if that link was too long, Benji, but there were just some stories I needed to tell.
Listen, there's no one that's complaining in here right now. We just want to keep going. I mean, in those early years of, you know, visiting these legendary studios, I think before we leave that period, because it's such a magical period in the music, maybe you should talk about some other early interaction with artists. Like, did you meet Sir Coxsone Dodd and, you know, the legendary Studio One? You know, I also want to talk about the first time that you got to meet Robert Nesta Marley as well. And also, of course, Osborne, Ruddock, and people like that. Maybe we should talk a little bit about that before we move away from that era.
Okay, I mean, I was very fortunate in going to Jamaica in those early times, late 70s, early 80s, because it was such an exciting period in the music. And I would say, with all due respect to modern music, that some of the things that are missing from it is the identification created by analog recordings. The fact that music is now homogenized in such a way that it's almost impossible to discover where Junior Gong voiced his latest tune, because it could have been anywhere. But in those days, because it was analog and because it was musicians gathered together, 1, 2, 1, and there was a sound that came from each studio, so you knew, if you studied it enough, you'd figure out, oh, that was Duke Reed, or that's Coxsone, or that's Channel One, or Harry J, that's Sylvan Morris engineering that, or that's Lee Perry when he built the Black Ark before he changed it up. And so because you were slightly obsessive, you would know those things. And obviously hundreds and hundreds of thousands of collectors did. So for me, going to the actual studios was, I mean, to go to Harry J and meet Sylvan Morris, who had been the pioneer for so much music when he was the resident engineer at Studio One, to go to Studio One and meet Coxsone Dodd when he was engineering himself. Bob Marley was lying in state, and we were there listening to some old Bob Marley tracks, and Lone Ranger was voicing "This a tribute to Bob Marley." And, you know, Bob Marley was lying in state just half a mile up the road at the National Arena. For me, I do consider myself to be very fortunate and very privileged to meet so many of these people. To meet Bunny Wailer coming out of Harry J studio and getting into his old Land Rover Jeep. There he is, you know, Bunny Wailer. And when you're a fan, meeting the people that make the music is just so special. To to climb the stairs at Treasure Isle, up those wooden stairs, that staircase, knowing that back in the day, the liquor store was downstairs, Duke Reid had this speaker, so he would listen to what Tommy McCook was doing upstairs. And if he didn't like the sound of the rhythms, he'd sometimes come up there and famously let off a couple of shots in the wall to encourage the musicians. And this is fact. These things happened. And, you know, I walked into the studio. This one will inform, educate, and inspire. Mikey Dredd was voicing Stepping Out of Babylon, and Marcia Griffiths was watching him, and Errol Brown was the engineer, and I'm in the room. You can't believe that you've been given that privilege, and I was given that privilege, and I'm extremely grateful. And the first time I ever met Bob Marley was, I saw him in a pub on Fulham Palace Road. That's why when young bands say, oh, I can't be doing with this touring, I said, you can't be doing with the touring? Bob Marley and the Wailers performed in a pub called the Greyhound on Fulham Palace Road for next to nothing. And when the show was over, because there was hardly any talking, they just performed and they blew the place apart. And I was walking down Fulham Palace Road thinking, you know, at last I've seen, this is 1973, the Burning album had just come out. At last I've seen Bob Marley. And this enormous cloud of smoke came out of a shop doorway. And I thought the shop was on fire. And when the smoke cleared, there was Bob Marley on the end of a spliff. Like 200 yards down the road from the Greyhound pub with Wire Lindo leaning on his guitar. I mean, you don't get moments like that very often in life. I rushed up and gushed, you know, since the days of What's New Pussycat, One Love, Simmer Down, I'm so glad to have met you, you know. And he smiled and shook my hand, and next thing his car screeched up, and he said, I've got to go. And him and Wire Lindo got into the car, and the car pulled off down Fulham Palace Road, and I stood there, and he turned around and waved out the back window of the car to me. I mean, can you imagine what that's like as a fan? That's just amazing. And years later, he was returning from Zimbabwe, and if you haven't seen the film, go and see the film Marley, 2.5 hours, it's like 10 minutes. It's priceless. I'm so glad I saw it in the cinema, but get it on DVD. And I actually heard a clip of myself in the movie asking him a question, because in 1980, he came back from Zimbabwe having performed for the independence celebrations, and he was on a stopover unannounced in London. And it was a Friday afternoon at Island Records, and I was going up the stairs, and he was coming down the stairs. And I seized the moment. I just said, Bob Marley, can you come on my radio show tomorrow night, please? And he looked at a couple of Rasta elders, and they nodded their agreement. And a couple of management were looking as if to say, I shouldn't have done this. And he came on the show. But before that, he said to me, do you want to come upstairs and listen to a new song I've just recorded? So I went upstairs, and I was in the listening room at Island Records with Aston Family Man Barrett and Bob Marley. And he played this song from a cassette. And at the end of the song, he asked me what I thought. I mean, to be sitting in a room with Bob Marley, he's asking your opinion on a song that he's just recorded. I'll have to play it, hang on. on a song that he's just finished recording. I can't really tell you how special that was. Thank you, Benji. So he said, okay, if you like it and you like the mix, which I did, he said, I'll play it for you tomorrow night. And he brought the tape to Capital Radio the following night. And this is the song. How special is that? To be in a studio on Capital Radio live, and the last track of an hour interview is that. So, Benji, I've been very fortunate, incredibly fortunate to have visited the island so many times, to have met so many people, and to have listened. I mean, I actually watched Captain Sinbad voicing 51 Storm with Little John, and Jammy's engineering, just so many. I mean, I could go on and on and on about instances, but I've just been very fortunate to have been in the right place at the right time on more than one occasion.
Tell us about the very first time you were on the radio in Jamaica.
Oh, well, that was 1983, because I'd gone on behalf of Capital Radio to record some special programs on the island. And I invited a number of artists to JBC. In fact, the security guard told me when I was leaving, he said, Rodigan, we never see so much artists in here at one time. I had them literally lined up. It was like a doctor's surgery. And I felt very honored that he'd said that. And the fact that so many of them were turned up. Ruddy Thomas, Derek Harriott, Big Youth. I mean, just, it was amazing. And the #1 radio DJ at the time was Barry Gordon, Barry G the Boogeyman on JBC Radio 1. He was a phenomenon. Island-wide, had the biggest audiences. No one had had audiences like him before. He was a phenomenon. And I asked him to do a report for Capital Radio, which he duly did. And he said to me, I would like to respond by inviting you onto my show on Saturday night. You can do a report on British reggae. I turned up at JBC Radio 1 halfway through that Saturday night. At the end of the news, he turned to me and said, let's do a clash. Thanks for the warning, Barry. So we did a clash, and that was 8 o'clock at night, and we were still clashing at 2 o'clock in the morning. It was a 6-hour clash, and to this day, if you go to Jamaica and ask anyone about that clash, they'll tell you about it. Probably it became an annual event for a number of years. The most famous was referred to as the Slang Ten Clash in '85. And the next day we had a dance down in Belmont, in Peter Tosh's town on the south coast, and we were driving down through the hamlets and villages, and all we heard was we heard like it was in a tape delay, because in those days it was cassette and tape. And many parts of Jamaica did not have television, so the radio was everything. It was the way of communicating. It was the hills and valleys. Take me over hills and the valleys. When Luciano says that, that is the truth. I remember being a wise guy thinking I could drive from Montego Bay to Mandeville and I would just use an SO road map to get there. Wrong. Because on the SO road map, a B road to me is a B road. In Jamaica, it's a track. And I ended up in cockpit country thinking I'd never ever get there. But over hills and valleys. I mean, the heartland of Jamaica. I was there again at Easter with my wife, and we drove deep into the heartland again, down into Westmoreland, and it is paradise. It is beautiful, and cane cutters at 12 o'clock in the morning coming in from fields, and you think, you ever catch yourself moaning about your work or your job, and you see what they have to do, and the conditions and the kind of pressure and heat. But it's the ups and the downs of Jamaican lifestyle. But I'm lost. I don't know where I started now. I'm completely lost. Sorry.
Well, you were talking about being, Barry G. challenging
Barry
to
G.
a clash.
So, so we were driving through the hills and valleys and down onto the south coast, and we just heard repeats of the cassettes of the show the night before, and it was a baptism of fire. But we were both passionate about the music, and we both revered the music. So it was a joy to clash with him. And we had dinner with our respective wives. We got together at Easter, and his wife and my wife, the four of us, had dinner down in Jamaica, and it was just wonderful he's back on top again. He's got the #1 radio show. He's unstoppable. He's come back on Mellow FM, and he's island-wide, and he's Barry Gordon.
So, I mean, in the years since then, you've definitely become recognised as a champion, a don, a master of the Soundclash, and if anyone needed any proof, then you might have noticed there's a sort of Champions League-esque trophy to my right, which is what, David?
Well, that's the World Clash Reset that took place at Easter Saturday night in Queens and Amazura in front of about 5,000 Jamaicans. And there may have been some Americans in there as well, but I think it's predominantly Jamaicans. Certainly Soundclash fanatics. For those of you not familiar with Soundclash culture, it's again an extension of this whole concept of wanting something that no one else has got. So they took it to the ultimate dimension when they sound systems started voicing dubs that were not only exclusive mixes in the way that King Tubby mix was exclusive, but they had your name called. So that meant you'd got the artist, not just the engineer, the artist to come to the studio and revoice his #1 tune, calling your name. And that meant that you had an exclusive dub, and that meant that you could seriously clash any contender. And sound system clashing started in the 1950s in Jamaica with sound systems like Duke Reed, the Trojan, Cox and Downbeat, Prince Buster's Voice of the People, trying to outdo each other with the quality of sound and exclusive recordings. In those days, they weren't even making records in Jamaica, so they would go to America, they'd buy 7-inch singles, bring them back, or 78s, and scratch the label off. So you didn't know what they were playing. So Cox and Hop was actually Call of the Gator by Willis Jackson, but everyone thought it was Cox and Hop. So already exclusivity was part of Jamaican culture. I have this, you don't know what it's called, I scratched the label off. Even in 70s and Jamaican sound systems in London, you'd pick up the record box, and it'd all be scrubbed out, you know, just Dukes or something simple on there that they'd know what it was. And this whole idea of cutting dub plates was an extension of this idea of a sound system, an enormous mobile discotheque, setting itself up in a village square in the heartland of Jamaica somewhere, and thousands of people coming to gather around and listen to this sound, and the pride that the sound system owner would take with the sound and the way it sounded and the way it was tuned up, the box boys, the MC, the selector. It was a team. It was the prestigious design of the speakers and the artwork. It was just the whole sound system culture. King Tubby's hometown hi-fi, the Chinese artwork that he'd created. It was part of the whole experience of listening to sound in such a way that it was so powerful and moving. You know, the fact that they'd have these metal horns that the kind of horns you'd see on a station platform, those would be the horns that were spitting out the treble. So the idea of dub plate cutting then developed into dub plate clashing and having songs that no one else has. And there's been a thing called World Clash every year in New York for many years. And they took a couple of years out and they did it as a reset this year. And I clashed with a number of sound systems. And the idea is that you come up with dubs that are completely exclusive to you. And you have to have what's known as customized dubs. You have to have some songs that are made only for that night, that can only be played that night and at no other time. And one of the biggest forwards I got for the night was a dub by Ninja Man. Now, Ninja Man had been in jail for 3 years on remand without charge. And he finally got bail after 3 years and 1 month. And I managed to get to speak to him the day he got bail. And I said, do you want a voice? He said, tell me where, tell me when. So the next morning, he was at 9 o'clock in the morning, he was voicing this dub. And it was customized as I'd requested. And there are a couple of offensive words in there, but you have to bear with me. It was customized for the clash. So when it's customized, it must name all your competitors, and it must say what you're going to do to them. And if it doesn't, it's of no consequence. So on the night, in Amazuru, I drew for this in the second round, and the forward was phenomenal. A, they couldn't believe I'd got Ninja Man because he'd just come out of jail. The intro alone tells you he's just come out of jail, as you're about to hear. And then he goes on to name the sounds that will die that night as a result of this customized dub, so bear with me. I mean, and the great thing was that I could actually hear him voicing it, because the people that I work with, Henry Lewis down in Jamaica, he had his mobile phone on. So he was on the other side of the board while the Ninja Man was voicing. So I could hear him voicing the dub, and he did it in one take. One take, been in jail for 3 years and 1 month, came out of jail the following morning and voiced this. And he used a very famous hit of his called Border Clash. So I'll just cue it up and you'll hear what he did. And you can imagine the forward it got when you hear it now. This is the World Clash. That was Ninja Man, and that was, as you can imagine, a very exciting moment in the dance. I'd just like to play one other example of something that I would typically do. The idea is to have customized dubs, but I always tried to come with humor and a little twist. And I would always try to think of something different, a news announcement, a sort of bizarre scenario, a courtroom appearance by a judge and prosecutor, various scenarios that I've used over the years. And I got the idea of a spoof that I could use for World Clash, and this is it. I'm not going to introduce it because hopefully it'll be self-explanatory. But there was a lot of surprise faces in the audience that night.
And this is from New York, right?
This is from the World Clash in New York on Easter Saturday.
And again.
Thank you.
Now, we all want to know about, we want to just get so much information about Clash from you because there have been so many legendary moments that I want to personally ask you about. But you raised something interesting there about context and where you're actually playing at the time, because obviously that's a reference to The Wire and you're in New York. I want to ask you about two famous dub plates that I remember hearing about. One being the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire dub plate from I think that was it around 2002 or something? I remember it was at Ocean in Hackney, I think, and or somewhere in Hackney, and it was like you versus Mighty Crown, Mataran, and yeah, tell us about the Chris Tarrant dubplate.
Yeah, again, I just got the idea that I could do Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and use my opponents as the contestants, and they had to come on stage and answer the questions, and they could phone a friend, and. It was actually, I think it was in Nottingham. It was UK Cup Clash, and when the music started and Chris Tarrant started it, the place just went crazy. No one could believe it. The problem was that Mighty Crown didn't know what the hell it was all about, because Who Wants to Be a Millionaire had not hit Japan, so they kind of stood there like, yeah, what, you know. Meanwhile, the place was going bonkers, and yeah, I mean, I didn't win, but people still talk about that night and that moment. And I always remember Chris Tarrant afterwards, he sent me a message and said, I don't know what the hell all that was about, but I hope it works for you, love. God bless you, Chris Tarrant. He did it with great vim and enthusiasm.
Amazing. And another dub I wanted to ask you about was the very famous Wyclef Maria Maria dub.
Oh, yeah.
When he brought it to you personally.
Indeed, that was an amazing night. In 1999, World Clash, once again, Amazura, New York, thousands of people. And I remember because I'd done a gig in Boston that night, and the following morning I was taking a coffee at the airport, and my agent rushed up to me and said, "You'll never guess who won World Clash last night." And I said, "Jaro, Bass Odyssey." "No, Mighty Crown." I said, "Are you serious?" He said, "Yeah, those Japanese kids, they won it." And they did. They absolutely annihilated all the competition, because they'd actually been collecting dubs for years off and under the radar in, again, like fanatics all over the world, like soundboys in Rome, in Berlin, in Zurich, all over the world, LA. And they collected these dubs for years and had never played them. So no one knew. And they turned up. Who are they? Mighty who? Who are these guys? And they just blew everyone out. All the Jamaican sounds dead in the water. And that was November. So then the agency said, "We want to do a clash with you and them." And all my mates said, "No, you're crazy. They'll kill you. Don't do it. You're mad." And I said, "That's exactly what I need to hear, so I'll do it." And it was in Hartford, Connecticut, and it was an absolute roadblock. I'll never forget it. It was ridiculous. And I was playing we're in the heat of the clash. Mighty Crown were hyped. You know, they were the world champions, unstoppable. And second, it was fourth or fifth round, I looked to the wings, and I couldn't believe my eyes. Beast, the bodyguard of Wyclef Jean, was standing in the wings. And he just went. So Mighty Crown were playing, so I walked over. I said, "What's going on, Beast?" He took me off the side of the stage and drew this curtain. There was Wyclef in a big beaver hat and a big long coat, a false fur coat. I said, "Wyclef, what are you doing here?" He said, "How are you?" I said, "I'm fine, you know, great to see you." He said, "Do you know what the #1 record is in America?" I said, "I've got no idea." He said, "Well, it's called Maria Maria, and it's by G&B The Product and me and Carlos Santana." And I said, "Congratulations, great, terrific, well done." And then, because I didn't know, I just landed. I had no idea. Typical me, of course, sometimes my radar doesn't pick these things up. And he said, "Yeah." And then he opened the coat, and he handed me the dub plate. He said, "That's the plate to kill Mighty Crown, play the second track." And that's the first time in my life that I've ever played a dub blind. I've never, you know, you always want to listen to a dub. And this is slightly edited because obviously I don't want to keep mentioning Mighty Crown in it. But he said, just play it. So I went back onto the stage, it was my round, and I pressed play on the dub plate. And in reggae sound system culture, you'll hear people talking about deep forward. You can get a forward in the dance, you get a forward from your crowd. If you ever get a deep forward, it comes from the back. Because the real heads don't stand at the front. They stand at the back. As Gregory Isaacs once said to me, Rodigan, always stand near the exit. Because you never know what's going to happen. And the real heads don't want to be seen to be desperate to see or watch anything. And may I just say, ladies and gentlemen, John Missouri is in the building. He's sitting to the right. He's a pioneer for this music as a journalist. Would you please salute John Missouri? Thank you, John, for all you've done for the music as a journalist. Thank you. And it was just one of those moments. The forward came from the back, and it just spread like a tidal wave. And I'll never, ever forget it. And I want, and by the way now, Simon and Sammy, the whole of Mighty Crown, they're very good friends of mine. We're very close friends now. We didn't know each other then. We'd hardly spoken. And I saw the look on their faces when this thing played, and well, it was over. I defeated the world champions, and it was really because of this.
Yo, what up, this one?
No more.
And once again, thank you to Mighty Crown, who took that on the chin and in such a sporting way, and I salute them for all they've done for the music. Obviously, I edited out the bit with mentions their execution that night, but with all due respect, they are fans of the music just as we all are here tonight.
And do you ever get nervous before Clash now?
Yes, of course,
yeah.
Incredibly nervous. There is nothing more nerve-wracking, apart from getting an MBE, I can assure you that was even more nerve-wracking, than sound clashing, because you're going into the game and it's very long. It starts at 11 o'clock midnight and it goes on to 5 in the morning, 5 hours. And you have to listen to every single dub that's played. If you ever repeat anything that's already been played, you're immediately disqualified. And you must play everything with it must have your name in it or it doesn't count, so you can be disqualified for that. You must be aware of what the competition is playing. And an example of that is the Clash with Bass Odyssey was in what they call the 1-for-1, because as the evening progresses, sounds are eliminated by public voting. And I was in the 1-for-1, and it was the best of 10. I was 3-0 down. Bass Odyssey are the iron fist of Jamaica. They are one of the hardest sounds in the world to defeat. They're almost unstoppable. Despite the fact that Squingy is no longer with them because he passed away, they are a feared sound. And I was 3-0 down in New York. And New York's their town. And I just thought, what am I going to do? And well, fortunately, I managed to pull back and pull back. And when I actually got back, we were at 5-5. So whoever scored the next plate won. And I played... Should I play the dub I played? I wasn't going to play, but I will.
Is that a real question?
All right, I will. This is it. Big up Liverpool. And you'll know why when you hear it in just a second. Big up Ken Dodd. Okay, this was voiced, and you'll know the time it was voiced from the intro, and a band from Liverpool.
Killing you tonight.
That was my 6th tune, and the forward was absolutely amazing. And thanks to Bob Andy, Janice from My Anchor Records is in the house tonight. Janice, so lovely to see you. I played... And excuse me, hand-picking people like this, but Janice, for all that you've done for Bob and his career, we love you and we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Bob alone, I know, untiring, for years, you've championed his fight, his rights, for his music, his publishing. We love you. We salute you for all you've done for Bob Andy. Ladies and gentlemen, please give me a round of applause for Janice from My Anchor. I played a couple of Bob Andy dubs earlier on, and they went down so well, and I was so pleased. And when I played that, I wondered what they were going to come with next, and I couldn't believe it. The place exploded. They played back a tune that I'd already played by Garnet Silk. You cannot play back a tune in a clash. That's the worst thing you can do. And Bass Odyssey couldn't, I mean, they couldn't believe that they'd done it either, but they did. And with all due respect to Worm and Damien, it was just one of those moments, you know, it's like the pressure was on, you choose a tune, maybe they queued up the wrong tune, I don't know, but that was it. And that was the moment at which I won the clash, because I'd got that point and it was the best of 10. And that's how razor edge and sharp it can be in dubplate clashing. Imagine you was there all night and everything you cut must be unique to you. It's very challenging, but very exciting.
And am I right in thinking that in the days before dubplate specials, you could actually draw for an artist to come and play for you?
Yes, you could. Yeah, that was true. That was amazing when that used to happen, and that really was the days before cutting a dub with your name in it, really. And I always remember, for me, one of the great highlights was a clash I did in... I've got to play the dub, sorry. It was a clash... It was a clash in New York, and it was in December 1985, and the snow was falling, and the crowd was 4 deep around the Brooklyn Empire. And when we arrived, I said to the driver and Barry G, I said, what's all this? Is there some sort of concert? And they said, it's for you. We couldn't believe it. There were thousands of people in the Brooklyn Empire. Why? Because Barry G and I had been doing these clashes on the radio. These cassettes had gone up to New York, so they all wanted to come and see what we looked like. And one of the dubs I cut that night for that clash was this. But also that night, performing on stage with people like Tiger, Chakademus and Pliers, Frank, new artists that had been, you could draw for live and direct. But this was a dub by someone who's no longer with us. But again, in terms of classic dubs that you never forget, this tenor saw dub just blew the place apart. This tenor saw.
Let the world feel laughing. Oh.
A very diplomatic dub, because he doesn't actually diss Barry G, because he wanted his records played on Jamaican radio. But it did tear down the house. That wasn't a live appearance, but that night some artists did perform, if you like, live for me and for Barry. But one I will never, ever forget was 1985 in Walter Fletcher Beach. And we couldn't believe the crowds up in Montego Bay when we arrived. Remember, we're just 2 radio DJs. There were thousands of people on the beach at Walter Fletcher. And I'm trying to get in with Barry, with the security. And I felt this tug on my shirt, and I turned. I couldn't believe my eyes. Because he was standing there, Augustus Pablo. Now, to tell you I hero worship this man is an understatement. I believe that this album, the first solo album, and the subsequent albums, particularly King Tubby Meets the Rockers Uptown, were definitive in creating a genre of music that was referred to the Far East sound, a haunting instrumental recordings, which in many ways led the way, I believe, for so much electronic dub music that we now know, bass culture, drum and bass. Pick up Goldie in the house. And Goldie, give me a signal for Goldie. Shy Effects' granddad is the great Count Shelley. Shy's in the house. Digital soundboy. And I said, Pablo, he sort of was incognito. I said, Pablo, what are you doing here? And he just let me glimpse the melodica. I said, what? And he said, I've come to play for you in a clash with Barry Gordon. I mean, I will never forget that night as long as I live. On the beach, Montego Bay, the sea rolling in, the waves crashing, moonlight beaming down, and we're playing dub for dub. I lined up on a 7-inch Real Rock, the Sound Dimension, and I said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm drawing for an artist in the 1-for-1 clash tonight, and I'm drawing for Augustus Pablo. And he walked into, we were performing on a sort of beach hut, and everyone was outside. And there were literally people hanging from the rafters of this thing. It was unbelievable. I don't know how it didn't fall down on top of all of us. And when I queued up the 7-inch, he took out the melodica, and just the place exploded. Imagine Augustus Pablo playing live for you in a clash on Real Rock. I mean, it was phenomenal.
Wow. Can we play that record?
I don't have it because it was live.
Yeah. I mean, with the rockers up
oh, yeah, well, absolutely. Why not? Hang on a second, I'll cue it.
I mean, wasn't it nerve-wracking when you first did Clash when you first had to clash in Kingston? I mean, how did that feel? Obviously, I mean, arguably...
Oh, yeah, the first clash I ever did in Kingston was at the new Kingston Drive-In Cinema, a drive-in cinema. And I walked onto the stage, and I was so nervous. I mean, I was absolutely, I was shaking. And Barry G introduced me, and there were thousands of people there, and there was a stunning, deafening silence when I walked onto the stage, because they'd all thought I was black. and you can imagine, I've been on the radio, so they presumed I was a black Londoner. So there was a deafening silence. And Barry G just said, play a tune. And I did. And this is one of the Augustus Pablo tracks that I've always revered. This is Cassava Piece. In case you're wondering why it's called Ram Jam Presents, I'd just like to remind myself and you of why. In 1967, on Radio Caroline, Tommy Vance played a song every day, rocking on that boat out in the North Sea. It was called Ram Jam by Jackie Mittoo. And I loved that haunting instrumental so much, I could not stop playing it. And my friends at school started to call me Ram Jam. That's where the nickname came from, Ram Jam Rodigan. And then in the early 70s, when I was unemployed, I started selling records in a street market in Putney and another street market in Oxford. And I called my record shack Ram Jam's Record Shack. And I was getting high on my own supply. I mean, I was so addicted to this music, I couldn't stand to think that I wouldn't be able to keep up with it. So if I could sell it, that meant I could buy it at wholesale price and keep the stuff. So that was an excuse. But here's another example of a haunting song from the summer of '76 by Augustus Pablo that I sold on that record marketplace in 1976. This is East of the River Nile by Augustus Pablo. And again, if this doesn't preempt what was coming in years to come, then nothing does. Drum and bass, dubstep, and thank you to all the dubstep pioneers who've welcomed me into their world and given me the privilege to play in places like this where normally I wouldn't have normally played. So thank you to the dubstep world for that invitation. I know James Breakage is here tonight, and Casper, thank you. East of the River Nile, Augustus Pablo. And what I used to love, Benji, about the music was going to listen to sound systems in England. The great Jazz Shaka, Coxon, Fat Man, the legendary sound systems in Dalston, the Four Aces Club, in the All Nations Club in Hackney, in London Fields, which is now a block of flats, Gossips in Dean Street, the old Q Club in Paddington, where the American soldiers used to come up from the base and model and pose off. And we didn't care because we still played our reggae when they wanted to hear their American 45s. And all those sound system selectors, the great Count Suckle, Duke Vin, because the joy really was listening to this music being played on sound systems, and each sound, Saxon and so on, individually queuing up and toning and tuning their sound systems so that you would hear a song like that and it would sound 10 times better than it just did.
I mean, in talking about England and your acceptance in Kingston and Jamaica, I mean, obviously, reggae music, arguably more than many other music styles, is uniquely linked to one country and one culture. And how did you overcome that obstacle, if it was one, of clearly being from a different country and continent and a different culture?
Well, actually, I didn't have to overcome it. It was overcome for me, because the love I have received from Jamaicans in Jamaica is something to behold. I've said this many, many times. The one thing that Jamaicans love is the truth. Point blank, a Jamaican will tell you to your face what he thinks of you or what she thinks of you, and they don't care. Speak the truth, calls it what it will. And the one thing they do like is passion. And anyone who's passionate about anything, whether it's cricket, football, horse racing, live from Newmarket and the Kingston racetrack, culture, arts, dance, literature, film, they are passionate people. And I hope that doesn't sound patronizing, because I can assure you it isn't. But if you're good at what you do and you care about what you do, then they will respect you. And I think more than anything else, they showed me so much love, because I was not a Jamaican. I'm not a Jamaican. I was a visitor to their island, to their country. And I was playing their music, and I was championing it on the radio. And I've had numerous, from Dennis Brown to Prince Buster, Bob Marley, many, many, many artists and common people from everyday walks of life who thank me for what I've done for the music. Well, all I've done is shared it, and I've had the good fortune and privilege to share it as a broadcaster on the radio. But I've had nothing but love from Jamaicans.
So before we leave the subject of sound clashing, I just wanted to ask you, in terms of the next generation coming through, I mean, what chance do they have, really, when they're clashing someone like yourself that's playing dubs from artists that aren't even around anymore?
Well, I would respectfully suggest that in future sound clashes, there should be a ruling in order to encourage new sound systems that no old dubs can be played, or certainly dubs by deceased artists. I think if the promoters were to introduce that, so that no dub by a deceased artist can be played, that would allow young, fresh musicians, selectors and DJs to come with original ideas and concepts that could be played, particularly in a one-for-one, because I think they're at a terrible disadvantage. You know, they cannot cut Dennis Brown. They cannot, you know, there are so many people they can't voice, Nicodemus, because the artists have passed away. So it's really unfair.
And how much of clash is music, and how much importance is it mic?
Very good question. It's both. I think a master of clash culture was Squingy. If you ever saw Squingy on stage for Bass Odyssey, it was phenomenal. He had this charisma. That's the only way I can describe it. When he opened his mouth and started speaking, if you could have played the best dub in the world, but if Squingy decided that he didn't like the dub and he'd finished talking about why he didn't like it, even you started to think, well, maybe it wasn't such a good dub after all. That was his skill. Somebody like Ricky Trooper is an inspired selector. Sometimes he gets a bit off key, as we all know. Famous YouTube, put it on YouTube speech is another story altogether. But yes, it is about what you've got to say and how you say it, as much as what's being played. I've always believed that the DJ is the last in the food chain. Because without the engineers, the songwriters, the musicians, the DJs are nothing. We don't have anything to play and nothing to do. So we're totally dependent upon all those that come before us in the process of making the music. So I believe that we are duty bound to almost to unveil the sculpture, the piece of art, before we play it with respect and address it accordingly. And that's the way I've always approached clash culture. Other selectors perhaps wouldn't agree with that, and they will try and inhibit you and intimidate you by making comments about you or your sex life or whatever in order to intimidate you. But that's another aspect of clash culture.
And you've always managed to use humour and your sort of performing history in your clashes as well. You've got to tell the Elvis versus Ninja Man story.
The Elvis versus Ninja Man. Well, a few years ago, I think it was 2007 in New York, they decided that they would do, what was the term, personality clashes or something. So instead of, they had World Clash with the sound systems, and then afterwards they had Tony Matterhorn versus Bounty Kid versus Beanie Man, and me versus Ninja Man. Well, anyone familiar with the music will know that Ninja Man is outrageous, has killed how many people in one-for-ones and clashes and so on. So I decided Ninja Man, I was going to come dressed as a ninja, but then I thought, no, he'll probably do that. But he decided that he would get dressed in the best suit, because I always wore suits in clashes in America, so he got all suited up. But the point was that I didn't know what he was going to wear, and he didn't know what I was going to wear. And then part of the whole thing of clash culture is the costume on the night. And I just thought, you know what? I'm going to come as Elvis. And it was decided on a train, a bullet train to Tokyo with Mighty Crown, because I saw someone watching a laptop, and the guy doing the TV show had a Elvis hairdo. It was completely over-the-top Elvis hairdo. He wasn't being Elvis, but he had an Elvis hairdo. And I thought, and earlier on in the restaurant, before we got on the plane, I'd heard, "You're caught in a trap. You can't get out. Because I love you too much, baby." Suspicious Minds. And I thought, Suspicious Minds, Elvis. I've got to be Elvis. So then I decided I would voice a dub as Elvis. So I revoiced "You're Caught in a Trap, Suspicious Minds," and I voiced it as, "Ninja, you're caught in a trap. You can't get out, 'cause Rodigan will kill you, baby." And I waited in the wings until he'd done his first round, and I got an announcer on a dub plate, an actor, to say, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm terribly sorry, but David Rodigan is unable to appear tonight because he's not available. But he has sent a substitute from Las Vegas." And I played the substitute selected dub plate from Half Pint, and I ran on as Elvis with the whole silver white suit with the red bandana, the hair, the makeup. In fact, my driver who picked me up was an old buddy of mine in New York. When he knocked on the hotel room, he said, "Oh, sorry, wrong room," and walked down the corridor. I said, "No, it really is me, you idiot. I'm Elvis." He said, "Are you crazy?" And when I was outside the Brooklyn trying to get in, the security wouldn't let me in at the back door because they thought I was some freak standing outside in November, freezing my nuts off, dressed as Elvis in a satin white suit with red bandana. I mean, it was ridiculous. But I did win the clash. Thank you.
It's absolutely clear that your enthusiasm for the music and the culture, and DJing in particular, has not faded one bit. I just wondered, you know, what's the secret to that?
Forever young. Ken Dodd famously said, "Retirement is for people who never enjoyed what they were doing and want to start to enjoy what they're about to do," or words to that effect. In other words, so many people have to do jobs that they don't enjoy. And a famous person once said, "If you do something you really enjoy, you'll never work again." I've always enjoyed, Benji, playing music to people. Again, I repeat myself, I know I'm privileged to do so, because there are literally hundreds of thousands of people that would like to do that as well. And whether it's playing in the local pub in the village, or whether it's playing in front of, 50,000 people in Tokyo, it's all from the same point of view of wanting to share music. And in recent times, thanks to the dubstep fraternity, I've been welcomed into a world that I probably would never have been welcomed into had James Breakage and Casper not decided to record my voice on their recordings. For that, I'm grateful, very grateful to them, because it's allowed me to play to a young audience who have been so enthusiastic in their response to songs that are special to me, that they've regenerated my batteries. And at my age, I still get a big buzz out of playing in the main room here at Fabric and watching the place go bananas when I play "Dubplates Playing in the Ghetto Tonight," or whatever, or a dubstep tune from Casper, or that's, I've been very, very fortunate, and that's what keeps me going. That's what keeps me young. Age is nothing but a number, and it's so, so true that, Ken Dodd is still, I use Ken Dodd as an example because the man he's awesome. I mean, I think he's 85 or 86. Go to his website. It's as cheap as chips, God bless him. I think his nephew must have knocked it out, 12 years old, but, he's still working. And as he said, why don't use the R word? He said, don't tell me about retirement, because retirement's for people who don't want to, who are fed up of doing what they're doing and now want to start doing what they really want to do, or words to that effect. And I still want to keep on doing this. I still get, tomorrow I'm on a plane to Berlin, playing in Berlin tomorrow night. Saturday night I'm in Erfurt, about 2 hours away from Berlin. Sunday night I'm playing Monday night I'm playing in Zurich, and Sunday night I'm playing in Biel. So that's 4 nights straight playing in different countries, Switzerland, Germany. Last weekend I was in Rome and Venice, Friday and Saturday. I'm just using those as examples of places that I'm playing to international audiences, people from different countries, many of whom can't even speak really good English sometimes, but They feel the flavor and the passion. You know, I defy anyone not to listen to Peace of Mind by Bob Andy. And if that doesn't make you want to cry, then you don't have a soul. Bob Andy's Peace of Mind for me is almost like a psalm of David. The work of Bob Andy has been an inspiration to me over the years, because in those 2 minutes and 40 seconds, you can find a joy for living and a reason for living. I frequently play at the festivals, Could You Be Loved? Yes. But one of the, Is This Love by Bob Marley. And because that song is a song of hope for two people. We'll share in my bed. We'll share this bed together, just the two of us. We'll live just the two of us. Because ultimately, there's so much hate in the world. There's so much anger. We're living in a more violent world. Young people hating on each other when they could be loving each other, not sharing anything, zoned off, ganged off, territories broken down, communities broken down. It breaks my heart. It breaks all of our hearts. Because love, in the words of Bob Andy and all the great writers and artists of our times and previous times, have always told us that we can overcome this because of love, if only we could find that love. And, you know, essentially, I believe this music is about love. We've had negative press because some elements of the music have concentrated on aspects of people's lives which, frankly, have got nothing to do with what this music was about. This music, in my opinion, was always about justice, rights, love, understanding, humility, and sharing and helping your brothers and sisters. Some of the greatest ghetto songs that emulated from those small studios in Western Kingston were about sharing, loving, repairing, you know, the tragedy of a broken heart. Don't even start me on Delroy Wilson and the songs that he's written and recorded. There have been, from such a small island, a small capital city, and in a small part of that capital city, these songs over the years that have come forth, Dennis Brown, Gregory Isaacs, so many names that we could list them all night here, we still wouldn't get to the end of them. But essentially, this music, and the reason why this music is still so popular, is because it is essentially about love and justice and standing up for people who have been downtrodden. Not just in the African journey, of course, as Maccabee says in his new album when he describes that journey from Africa to Jamaica, and 500 years. Maccabee's made a track about that. He's talked about the fact that you, on the radio and television, you're bombarded with, can you make a claim? Would you like to make a claim because of an accident at work, a car crash, unlawful disengagement from work? And he's done a new recording based on that, but his story is, I want to make a claim for the loss of my culture and my name. And when I heard that song, I shivered, because he describes where this thing comes from. A people who were oppressed for 400 years. If you go and see, as we all have, as the beginning of the Bob Marley film starts with the door of no return, to think that people made that journey and never came back. This music is born from that, and that's why it's so important, and that's why it is so passionate, and that's why I think it has such an effect on people, because it is so, so soulful.